After a heated argument with my husband Julian left me at a train station downtown, with no money and no ID. I was about to walk 50 miles home when a blind man on a bench said, "Pretend to be my daughter. My private driver is coming in 5 minutes. Your husband will regret leaving you with the richest man in the city." The words hung in the air, but they didn't make sense at first. Why would a strange blind man ask me to pretend to be his daughter? I looked around, but it was just me and the wind whipping through the empty station. No one else. Nothing. I pulled my coat tighter around me, feeling the bite of the cold. I could still hear the screech of tires in my mind, the sound of my husband Julian's car as it peeled away from the curb, leaving me standing there in the shadows of the train platform. I tried to steady my breath, fighting against the ache in my chest, the knot of betrayal that twisted tighter with each passing second. The heat of the argument was still fresh in my mind. He had screamed at me, called me worthless, said that I was a burden, that I was the reason he had lost himself. "You've always been mediocre, Evelyn. You've never been enough," he had spat, his words more venomous than any insult. And then he drove off. Just like that, left me. There, on a bench a few feet away, sat a well-dressed blind man. He had a cane resting beside him, his with black eyeglass, but his presence was unmistakably sharp. He hadn't spoken loudly, yet it felt like the whole station was holding its breath with him. He shifted slightly, adjusting his position on the bench, and spoke again, more deliberately this time. "Pretend to be my daughter. My private driver is coming in 5 minutes. Your husband will regret leaving you with the richest man in the city." I didn't answer. How could I? Was this man even real? Maybe I was delusional, the grief clouding my judgment, but his voice was calm, steady, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "Do you know what it's like to be left behind?" he asked, his voice laced with a strange familiarity. "To be abandoned without a second thought?" I nodded slightly, unsure of what to say. He smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "I can help you. I have something you need. Someone like you deserves better than this." His words didn't make sense. How could a blind man possibly help me? But there was something about him, an energy, a weight in his voice that made me listen. "What do you mean?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He leaned forward, his head tilting slightly, as though considering me. "I've lost someone important to me, my daughter." His voice softened, a hint of sorrow seeping through. "But I can give you a chance, a way out of this. You don't have to be stuck here. You don't have to be alone." I stared at him, unsure of whether to believe him. "What do you want from me?" His smile returned, more confident now. "Pretend to be my daughter. My private driver is coming in 5 minutes. Your husband will regret leaving you with the richest man in the city." I blinked, processing the absurdity of it. Pretend to be his daughter? His words felt like a lifeline thrown into the darkness. A chance, however strange, to escape from the ruin Julian had left behind. The thought of starting over, even if it was under someone else's terms, stirred something in me. I hesitated just for a moment, but the desperation gnawed at me. I had nothing left to lose. I nodded, barely believing what I was saying. "Okay." The blind man's smile widened, and he leaned back into the bench, the air around him suddenly filled with a sense of possibility. "Good," he said. "Let's get started. This could change everything for you, Evelyn." And in that moment, I knew my life would never be the same again. The car arrived 5 minutes later, just as Stephen had promised. It was sleek, black, the kind of SUV that made the streetlights shimmer off its polished surface. The chauffeur opened the door, his movements precise, practiced. I hesitated before stepping inside, glancing back at the train station that had felt like my prison just moments ago. The door closed softly behind me, sealing me in. The leather seats felt impossibly soft beneath me, like they were made for someone else. The engine purred to life, and we pulled away from the empty station, merging with the pulse of the city. I kept my eyes forward, still processing everything. The wind in my hair had been biting, but the warmth inside the car was almost suffocating in contrast. I could feel my heart racing, but I didn't know if it was from fear or something else. Something that felt like hope. Something that had been missing for so long. The man sitting across from me, Stephen, hadn't said a word since I'd gotten in. He stared out the window as if lost in thought. I couldn't read him. His face was unreadable, the kind of face that didn't give much away. Then, after what felt like an eternity of silence, he spoke. "My daughter was everything to me," he said, his voice soft but steady, as though the words had been waiting to come out for a long time. "She died 30 years ago. Car accident. Just a kid. A good girl. She was the center of my world." The weight of the words hung in the air. He paused, but the tension in the car didn't fade. He didn't look at me, but his voice cracked just slightly. It was the first sign of vulnerability I had seen from him, and it caught me off guard. "I never got over it," he continued, his gaze still out the window. "Losing her. The emptiness it left behind." That's when I realized I couldn't do it alone anymore. I didn't want to be alone. I didn't know what to say. I was still trying to process the strange turn my life had taken. Just hours ago, I had been at the train station, helpless and heartbroken. Now I was sitting in a luxury SUV, heading God knows where, with a man who was offering me something that sounded too good to be true. He glanced at me, his eyes briefly meeting mine in the rearview mirror. "I've spent my life building an empire. Wealth, power, people think that's what makes you strong. But when you lose everything that matters, it doesn't mean anything." I shifted uncomfortably, my thoughts swirling. I had no idea where this conversation was going. "So, what does this have to do with me?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop myself. Stephen's lips twitched, like he was amused by my directness. He leaned back in his seat, folding his hands together in his lap. "I'm offering you a chance to escape the life you've been living," he said. "A chance to fill the void, to be something more than a pawn in someone else's game." I swallowed hard. My life with Julian had been a game, one I had lost over and over again. Now here I was, sitting in a car with a man who was offering me something I'd never had: control. We drove through the city, the skyline towering above us, full of glass and steel. I watched the passing buildings, the billboards advertising luxury, success, power. It was all so foreign to me, yet somehow it felt familiar too. I had once dreamed of a life like this. We turned down a street, and the car slowed as we approached a building that made my heart skip a beat. It was a high-rise penthouse, the kind you only saw in movies. The doorman opened the door, greeting Stephen with a bow. The luxury was overwhelming, and I suddenly felt small, like I didn't belong. "This is where you'll stay," Stephen said as he guided me inside. "You'll be part of my family now. A new beginning." I felt my knees weaken as I stepped inside, the weight of the place pressing down on me. It was beautiful. Too beautiful. I didn't know if I should be excited or terrified. He introduced me to the staff, his daughter now, playing the part that I didn't yet understand. A woman with a sharp smile led me to a room, larger than any place I'd ever lived in. As the door closed behind me, I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind reeling. I had walked into something I couldn't yet comprehend. But as I sat there, staring at the perfect, serene world Stephen had built, I realized one thing. This was my way out. My ticket to freedom. But at what cost? I couldn't believe how quickly my life had shifted. A stranger's kindness. Or was it a trap? I wasn't sure yet. But I knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. I never imagined a life like this. The penthouse was quiet when I awoke the next morning. The city sprawled out below like a sea of lights. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt something that resembled peace. But it wasn't just peace, it was power. A power I had never known. A power I had never even dreamed of. Stephen's world was nothing like the life I had left behind. It was like stepping into a different dimension. Everything about it screamed control. The way the staff moved with purpose, the way Stephen was treated by everyone, like a king among men. The vastness of the city from his floor-to-ceiling windows made me realize how small my old life had been, and how quickly everything had changed. I was his daughter now, his daughter. The word felt strange in my mouth, but I said it anyway. I had to. In front of his colleagues, his friends, in all the social gatherings that seemed endless, I wore the role like a coat. It was smooth, sleek, and entirely unfamiliar. But I was playing the part now. The first dinner party I attended with Stephen was a blur of perfectly tailored suits, crystal glasses, and smiles that never quite reached their eyes. I was introduced to his inner circle: business partners, influential figures, a crowd that seemed to orbit around Stephen like planets around the sun. They didn't know me. Not really. To them, I was just his daughter, a fresh face in a world of high society names. But there was something in the way they looked at me, something calculating. I wasn't just an outsider anymore. I was part of this world, whether I liked it or not. I couldn't help but wonder how easily Julian's world had fallen apart, how easily he had left me in the dirt, like nothing. Now, Stephen's world was my world. The wealth, the power, the influence, it was mine to command. Julian hadn't stopped trying to reach me. His messages piled up, but I refused to open them. I wasn't interested in hearing his hollow apologies, his pleas. I wasn't the same woman he had left at that train station. No, I was someone else now. A woman who had learned to control her own fate. Stephen took me into his confidence, revealing his empire piece by piece. I learned about his investments, his companies, the power he wielded in every sector. And, as I listened, something clicked inside me. This wasn't just about being his daughter. This was about him making me his heir. I was his replacement, his second chance at family, but I was also his successor. And in that power, I could feel my old life, Julian, slipping further and further away. A lawyer Stephen had hired met with me to discuss my financial security. It was the kind of meeting I never thought I'd be part of, let alone lead. The attorney laid out all the assets, the trusts, the inheritance that would eventually be mine. It was surreal. I didn't just inherit money. I inherited control. Control over my future, control over Stephen's empire, and eventually, over my own destiny. I let myself settle into the role, but the more I learned, the more I realized how much power Stephen held. I could feel the weight of it, the sense of unlimited potential, and it didn't take long for me to use that power to my advantage. I started digging. I used my new position to find out more about Julian, his financial troubles, his infidelities. He had been careless, thinking his success would protect him, but it didn't. His business was crumbling, the cracks widening with every passing day. I watched from a distance as he fell apart, every failure a reminder of how he had treated me. Then one day, he showed up at Stephen's penthouse. His face was pale, drawn. He begged me to come back to him, to leave this life behind. His eyes were desperate, pleading, but there was nothing left in me to give him, not anymore. I looked at him through the glass, my heart unburdened by the sight of him. He had no power over me anymore. He had never had power over me. "I'm not coming back, Julian," I said, my voice colder than I expected. "It's too late." There was something almost satisfying in that moment, watching him grovel, watching him realize that he had no hold on me anymore. I had been his victim, but now I was free. Revenge didn't have to be violent. It didn't have to be dramatic. It was in the choices I made. It was in the way I took back control of my life, piece by piece. I didn't need to destroy him. I just had to let him destroy himself. And I would watch as he fell, because in the end, the only thing Julian had ever truly taken from me was my self-worth. And now I was the one in control. I was no longer the woman left at a train station, I thought, as I stood in front of the city's skyline, my reflection staring back at me. I was someone else now, a woman with a future and a plan, and nothing would stand in my way. It was only a matter of time before Charles showed up. I hadn't thought about him in years, not really. The silence between us had been comfortable, even welcome, after all the years of his greed and manipulation. But then, out of nowhere, a message from him appeared on my phone. The words were casual, almost too light for the weight of what I'd left behind. "Evelyn, I know things have been hard. I heard about the divorce. I'm sorry, I'd like to talk. Maybe catch up?" I stared at the message for a long time, unsure of what to feel. My brother had never once reached out to check on me, not in the years when I had needed it the most. But now, after everything, he was suddenly concerned? It was the kind of manipulation I'd learned to spot a mile away. But still, I couldn't help the small part of me that hoped, maybe this time, things would be different. I agreed to meet him. He showed up at the penthouse the next evening, dressed in the same worn-out suit he'd always worn, his face older but no less calculating. I stood at the door, my hand on the doorknob, watching him as he approached. There was a flicker of something, regret, or maybe guilt, in his eyes, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "Evelyn," he said, pulling me into a hug that felt like a lie. I stiffened, but let it pass. "I didn't know what happened with Julian," he continued, his voice smoother than I remembered. "I heard about everything, and I just wanted to make sure you were okay." I couldn't keep the suspicion from showing on my face. "You're not here just for that, Charles." His lips curled into a smile, the kind that never quite reached his eyes. "I'm your brother. Of course I care about you." But I knew better. He cared about my money. As he sat in one of the plush chairs, sipping the drink I had reluctantly offered him, he began to push his agenda. "You know, Evelyn," he said, leaning forward, "you've got a lot of power now. I'm sure Stephen wouldn't mind if you took more control over some of his assets. It could be good for you, good for the family business." I clenched my jaw. The audacity. He had always thought he could pull the strings behind the scenes, always thinking he could control the family's fortune, even when he had done nothing to deserve it. "I don't need your advice, Charles," I said, my voice colder than I'd intended. "I'm not in the mood for games." He ignored the sharpness in my tone. "I just think it could help us both. You have power now, real power. You could be a force in this city. Together, we could run things better than Stephen ever could." The offer hung in the air, heavy with the stench of his ulterior motives. I could see it now, the wheels turning behind his eyes. He wasn't just after influence. He wanted control over me, over Stephen, over everything that had fallen into my lap. He was willing to use me as a pawn, just like everyone else. I leaned back, studying him. "What do you want, Charles?" He hesitated, just long enough for me to know I had him cornered. "I need a loan," he said, his voice quieter now. "A big one. My business is struggling. I need capital to stay afloat. Just a loan, Evelyn. You've got more than enough." The room felt smaller as the words hung between us. A loan. I'd known this was coming. My brother had never been able to stay out of trouble, and now he wanted to drag me into it. He thought my success could save him from his own mess. I watched him for a moment longer, and then the decision became clear. "I'm not giving you a dime, Charles. You're on your own." The shock on his face was almost satisfying. He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. "I know about your debts," I said, my voice low but steady. "I've been looking into it. You've been hiding money from me, lying to everyone around you, including me. You're not getting anything from me." His face twisted, the mask of concern dropping away to reveal the man I'd always known. A man who would take whatever he could, no matter the cost. "You're making a mistake," he spat, standing up quickly. "You think you can trust Stephen? He's using you just like everyone else. You think you have power? You're nothing without me." I stood up, feeling the power surge through me as I confronted him head-on. "I don't need you, Charles, not anymore, and I certainly don't need your lies." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I didn't flinch. It wasn't just about the money. It was about control, and I had learned one thing: I couldn't trust family. But I was prepared to fight for what was mine. The next day, I called Stephen's lawyer and laid everything out. I wasn't going to let Charles ruin what I had built, not now that I finally had the chance to rebuild my life. And when I finally told Stephen about the betrayal, I knew he'd understand. It wasn't just about taking control of my future anymore. It was about protecting it. Julian's empire crumbled faster than I ever imagined. One day, he was a titan, his name synonymous with success. The next, he was a man who couldn't even afford a decent lawyer. The tabloids were quick to pick up on it. His debts, his lies, the public humiliation. I had to admit, part of me felt a twisted satisfaction watching him fall, but at the same time, I couldn't shake the weight that sat heavily in my chest. Stephen's empire, however, was thriving. I had become the face of it, my face. I was no longer just the woman on the sidelines, the wife who had been left behind. I was CEO now. I made decisions, ran meetings, and signed documents that would determine the future of hundreds of people. It felt powerful. More powerful than I ever thought possible. Yet, with every new step I took in this world, I felt the heaviness of the choices I had made. I had taken Julian down, but in doing so, I had changed too. The woman I had been, the one who had stood by her husband for 25 years, felt like a distant memory. Was I still her? Or had I become something else entirely? Someone unrecognizable? Stephen's health had been declining for months now. At first, it was subtle, an occasional cough, a missed appointment. But it was starting to show. He was older, frailer, and I was beginning to realize that the life I had built here, the one where I was his daughter and the heiress to his empire, was uncertain. His decline felt inevitable, and I couldn't ignore the nagging thought that my future, which had seemed so promising, was built on unstable ground. I took a long walk one evening, letting my thoughts swirl, my mind trying to make sense of everything. I was no longer just living in Stephen's shadow, but I wasn't sure where my shadow ended either. There were moments when I would catch myself in the mirror and wonder if I still knew who I was. That night, my old friend Rachel called. She had heard about everything: the divorce, the empire, the rise and fall of Julian. We hadn't spoken in years, not after the distance between me and everyone in my old life grew too wide, but hearing her voice brought a sense of calm, a reminder of the woman I used to be before all of this. She reminded me of the person I was before revenge had consumed me, before I had tasted the bitterness of betrayal. "You've come so far, Evelyn," she said softly, "but don't lose yourself in the process. You've always had more to give than just vengeance." I didn't know how to answer her. I wasn't sure if I even knew the answer anymore. Was this the person I had become? A woman whose only joy came from watching others suffer? Or was there more? I started focusing more on the parts of myself that still felt pure. Philanthropy, for example. With my newfound wealth, I could make a difference. I could help others who had been abandoned, who had lost everything the way I had. It felt good. It felt right to be doing something that wasn't driven by bitterness. And yet, the letter from Julian arrived one morning, an apology, a plea for reconciliation. His handwriting looked so familiar, so personal, almost desperate. "I was wrong," he wrote. "I miss you, Evelyn. I will always love you." I crumpled the letter without reading the rest. His apology was meaningless. He was meaningless. I had already moved on. The man I had once loved had betrayed me, and the version of him I had seen in that letter was nothing more than a ghost. But the one thing Julian had gotten right was this: he was a part of my past. And that past no longer had any claim on me. Then came the settlement offer. A final attempt to buy me back, a chunk of his remaining wealth, an attempt to keep me tied to him, to his mistakes. But I wasn't his to buy anymore. I was mine. I took a deep breath as I stared at the letter, a strange sense of peace washing over me. The chains were broken, I thought to myself. But what would I do with my newfound freedom? The answer was clear. I would embrace the future. The past was behind me, and it was time to step fully into the woman I was becoming. I didn't need Julian's money, his apologies, or his approval. I had built something of my own. I would make my own legacy, on my own terms. Stephen noticed the shift in me. He could see that my focus was no longer on the empire, on him, but on something deeper. But I wasn't worried anymore. The choices I had made had brought me here, to a place where I could finally control my destiny. And I wasn't about to let anyone, not even him, take that from me. The weight of the world, Stephen's empire, my new life, settled on my shoulders with a weight that felt heavier each day. I wasn't just living in the aftermath of my own decisions. I was building a future I had never expected, never dreamed of. I sat in the office of Stephen's penthouse, a space that had become mine just as much as it was his. The high-rise windows framed a breathtaking view of the city, but as I stared out at the glittering skyline, I felt an unsettling emptiness creep into my chest. The world had shifted, but was I the one who had truly changed? I was the head of Stephen's empire now, overseeing a vast network of businesses that spanned continents. Success was no longer something I chased. It was something that had been handed to me. I was the one who made the decisions now, the one whose name carried weight in the boardrooms, in the markets. And yet, when I tried to savor it, I found myself yearning for something else, something that wasn't tied to power or money. Julian had been left in the dust, his empire reduced to rubble, the remnants of his failures scattered like broken glass. He was finished. But what haunted me was the realization that he wasn't just financially ruined, he was desperate. His desperation manifested in ways that only fed his spiral into madness. His phone calls, increasingly erratic, now came not with apologies but with threats. He would spread rumors about me, try to tarnish my name in every possible way. But what hurt most was not the lies he told. It was the fact that he could still make me feel something. I hadn't let go of him the way I had thought, and that made my victory feel hollow. Then Adam reappeared. I hadn't expected to see him again, not after all these years. Adam had been my first love, the man who had made me feel seen before Julian did, the one who had slipped away before I ever had a chance to hold on. When he walked back into my life, all those old feelings, the ones I had locked away, came rushing back. He was older, his eyes carrying a weight I remembered too well, but that same spark was there, the one that used to set me on fire. He was offering me a fresh start, a chance to leave everything behind. He wanted us to run away together, to rebuild. He said I deserved something better, something that wasn't so tainted. And for a moment, I was torn. I stood there, in his arms, feeling the pull of the past, feeling like I could be the person I once was, before all the betrayals, before Stephen's empire, before the revenge, before everything had spiraled out of control. But when I stepped back, the clarity hit me like a punch to the gut. What Adam was offering wasn't freedom, it was an escape from the life I had created, from the woman I was becoming. No, I had fought too hard to build this life, too much had been sacrificed, and too much had been lost for me to walk away now. I wasn't the same woman I had been. I had found power, my own power, and I wasn't going to let him or anyone else take that from me. I rejected him. The next few days were filled with restless nights, haunted by his words, and the echo of what I'd almost chosen. Was I really ready to let go of everything that had made me who I was now? Was this woman, this version of myself, the woman I had truly wanted to be? Stephen's health was continuing to worsen. I watched it slowly, in those small moments where he would pause to catch his breath or forget something important. But I couldn't let myself focus on that. My own independence was still so fragile. Julian's final attempt to sabotage me came unexpectedly. He tried to turn our children against me, feeding them lies, playing on their loyalty to him. He thought he could still manipulate me through them. But this time, it didn't work. This time, I saw it for what it was. I couldn't go back, not to him, not to that life. I had to sever all emotional ties. The man I had once loved had no place in the life I was building now. I sat in the boardroom, the door shut, my hands clenched on the table. "It's over, Julian," I whispered, not to him but to myself. "It's over." The empire Stephen had built, my empire, was no longer just his. It was mine too. And as I took that step, as I chose to stay in this life, I realized something important. I didn't need revenge to feel whole. I needed control. And I had it. The final blow had come, slow and deliberate, but it was complete. Julian's last assets, his pride, his empire, the remnants of the life we once shared, had been seized. He was nothing now. A man whose past sins had caught up with him, a man who had no choice but to watch it all slip through his fingers. He had fallen from grace, and I had pushed him to the edge. The phone calls were endless, his pleas growing more frantic with each passing day. He had nothing left to lose, and yet he still tried to claw his way back to me. It was pathetic, really. He wanted to be the man he never was, the husband he had never been. But that man was dead. He had died the moment he left me at that train station, and I had buried him. But it didn't stop the ache. I stood at the window of Stephen's penthouse, the city below me bustling with life. I could feel the weight of my choices pressing in from all sides. What had I become in this quest for vengeance? I had orchestrated the downfall of the man who had betrayed me, but in doing so, I had torn apart the very fabric of who I was. My heart still beat with anger, but now it was tempered with guilt. Stephen's health was deteriorating. I could see it in his face, in the way he moved, slower now, more fragile. The man who had once seemed so invincible, so untouchable, was fading before my eyes. And as I watched him, a realization hit me. This life I had built, the one I had fought so hard for, might not last. Stephen might not last. One evening, Julian showed up, uninvited, at the penthouse. He was gaunt, his face drawn, the weight of his failures evident in every line of his body. He stood in the doorway, a man stripped of everything but his desperation. He looked like a ghost. "I'm sorry, Evelyn," he said, his voice breaking. "I was wrong. I didn't realize what I had until I lost it all. Please, I'll do anything. Let's fix this." I stood frozen, watching him. The man who had left me in the cold, who had crushed me under his arrogance, was now begging for forgiveness. For a moment, I was paralyzed. The bitterness, the rage, the hurt, all of it rushed back like a tidal wave. "You think I'll just forget all of it? Forget how you treated me?" My voice was steady, but inside, the war raged. "You don't get to ask for my forgiveness, Julian. Not after everything." He took a step forward, his eyes pleading. "We can fix this. You, me, the kids. We could make it right again. I'll do anything, Evelyn. I'll make it up to you." I wanted to scream at him, to tell him how much he had ruined me, how much he had taken from me. But something in me stopped. Something in his face, so raw, so broken, made me wonder if I could help him, if I could help us. But the truth was, I couldn't. Not anymore. "You've destroyed everything, Julian," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "And now you have nothing left. Not even me." His face fell, the despair in his eyes palpable. He was broken, but it wasn't my responsibility to fix him anymore. It never had been. "I won't help you," I said firmly, the words tasting like liberation. "Not this time." He stood there, the silence between us thick with all the words left unsaid, and then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night, leaving me with nothing but the hollow echo of his footsteps. As I watched him go, something inside me shifted. I wasn't the woman who had been abandoned at that train station. I wasn't even the woman who had sought revenge. I was someone else, someone stronger. And I was finally free. Stephen came to me later that night, his frail body leaning heavily on his cane. He looked at me with a softness I hadn't expected, and for the first time in weeks I saw the truth in his eyes. "I care about you, Evelyn," he said gently. "More than you know. You've done so much for me, for us, but you don't have to stay here if it's not what you want. You have your own life now." The words struck me like a revelation. He was offering me a choice. The freedom I had craved for so long was finally within my grasp, but it came with a price. The question I had been avoiding, the question that had haunted me from the moment I stepped into this life, was now in front of me. Would I stay with Stephen, build a life with him, or would I strike out on my own and face the world I had created? The weight of the decision pressed down on me, but I knew, deep down, that the answer was simple. I was done being defined by my past. I was done being defined by him. "I'm leaving, Stephen," I said, my voice resolute. "It's time to start my own future." And as I walked away, I realized something. I was no longer the woman I had once been. The chains had been broken, and the future was mine to shape. The quiet of the penthouse was deafening. The city buzzed below, alive with movement, yet inside everything felt stagnant. I stood at the large windows, watching the lights stretch far into the distance, wondering if I would ever feel truly at peace again. Julian was gone. His empire had fallen to ruin, and the world he had built with lies and manipulation had collapsed like a house of cards. I had won, or at least that's what I had told myself. But as the days stretched on, the victory didn't taste as sweet as I had imagined. It was hollow, like an empty bottle that once held something precious. I had distanced myself from Stephen. I couldn't help it. The more he supported me, the more I found myself pushing away, as though his love and care were reminders of how far I had drifted from the woman I had once been. I needed to prove something, not just to him but to myself, that I could be my own person, without anyone telling me what to do or who to be. Stephen had given me everything: power, wealth, influence, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. There was still a part of me that was untethered, still a part of me that needed to be free. I started revisiting old places, the ones that used to mean something before everything changed. I walked through the streets of my childhood neighborhood, the familiar scent of the old bakery mixing with the cool evening air. Everything felt smaller now. The house where I grew up seemed like a distant memory, a life that belonged to someone else. My old friends had moved on too, some of them with families, others with careers far removed from mine. I wondered if they would even recognize the woman I had become. When I stood in front of my old home, a strange sadness washed over me. Was this the person I used to be? Could I ever go back to that simplicity? To the way life used to feel before betrayal had twisted everything? The woman I had been was buried beneath layers of decisions and consequences. And then there was Julian. I heard about him in bits and pieces, rumors, whispers in the press. His name was no longer synonymous with success, but failure. His desperation had turned him into a shadow of the man he once was. I could almost feel his presence, even though I hadn't seen him in weeks. His decline was as inevitable as the sunrise, but it still didn't feel like enough. Was this truly justice? Or had I merely become the person I hated? Stephen's health had worsened, though he hid it well. He had grown thinner, quieter, and the energy that once radiated from him now felt drained. It wasn't just his body failing him, it was his spirit. And I was helpless in the face of it. Despite everything, he proposed something to me, something I hadn't expected. He wanted me to join him in expanding his empire. As his equal, I stared at him across the dinner table, trying to understand what he was asking, to work with him, by his side, making decisions together. He was offering me more than wealth, more than power. He was offering me a future, but in return, I had to let go of the independence I had fought so hard to achieve. The thought of merging my life with his, of losing my autonomy, made my chest tighten. Could I trust anyone again? I had let myself be controlled for years by Julian, then by Stephen. Was I destined to always live in someone else's shadow? But there was something in Stephen's eyes that made me hesitate. He wasn't asking me to be dependent on him. He was asking me to be strong, to stand beside him. And yet, I was still afraid of losing myself. I had spent so much of my life fighting for what I thought I needed, but now, I had the chance to choose my future, not someone else's. I began to shift my focus. I started using my wealth and influence for something greater than power. I worked with charities that supported women who had suffered from betrayal and loss, helping them rebuild their lives. For the first time, I felt like I was making a difference, not in the world of business or power, but in something that truly mattered. But Julian wasn't done with me. He reappeared, like a ghost from the past, a final attempt to regain what he had lost. He tried to claim a portion of Stephen's empire through legal means, his desperation so palpable, I almost felt pity for him. Almost. I knew I had to face him once and for all, not out of spite, not for revenge, but because I had to close the door on him completely. I met him in the lawyer's office, his eyes pleading for a future that wasn't mine to give. "I'll make it right, Evelyn," he said, his voice raw. "I'll fix everything." But I was done. "I don't need you to fix anything," I said, my voice steady. "You don't have a place in my life anymore, and I won't let you take anything else from me." As I walked away from the meeting, I felt the weight of the past lift off my shoulders. I wasn't the woman I had been. The chains that had once bound me, Julian, the betrayal, the lies, had been broken. The future was mine. I had become the person I needed to be, I whispered to myself, the realization settling in. But now, who would I become moving forward? The answer was simple. I would create my own path. A path that was finally free from the past, and nothing would stand in my way. I stood at the edge of the balcony, staring out over the city. The skyline stretched before me, a blur of lights and movement, and yet all I could see was the uncertainty of what lay ahead. I had come so far, but the road still stretched on, long and unmarked, with no clear direction. Stephen's health continued to deteriorate. Each passing day he grew weaker, the light in his eyes dimming, his voice growing softer. He was no longer the powerful figure who had taken me in, the man who had once made me feel like I had a future beyond my past. Now he was someone I needed to care for, someone I needed to be strong for. but I couldn't shake the feeling that, despite all his love and support, my future wasn't bound to him anymore. My life had been a series of twists and turns, a whirlwind of revenge, betrayal, and power. And now, as the dust settled, I realized something I hadn't fully accepted before. Revenge had been sweet, but it hadn't filled the emptiness I had felt for so long. It hadn't made me feel whole. It hadn't given me the peace I thought it would. There was a knock at the door, and Stephen's voice echoed from the hallway. "Evelyn, can we talk?" I turned, slowly, my heart heavy with the weight of what was coming. He had been nothing but kind to me, too kind, perhaps. His love was unwavering, but did I love him in return? Or was I simply staying because it felt safe, because it gave me a sense of stability in a world that had been anything but? I opened the door, and he stood there, looking more fragile than I had ever seen him, his face pale and drawn. But his eyes, those eyes, still held a warmth that made my chest ache. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice soft. "I care about you, Evelyn, more than I ever thought possible. I want you to stay, with me. I want you by my side." The words hung in the air, settling between us like a promise I didn't know if I could keep. My heart twisted. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing on me. I had worked so hard to become independent, to free myself from Julian's grip, to reclaim my life. And yet, here was Stephen, offering me everything I could ever want: power, love, security. But it came with a price: my independence, my future. I wasn't sure if I was ready to make this decision. I wasn't sure if I could give him that part of me. But there was one thing I did know. I wasn't the same woman I had been when I stepped into this life. I wasn't defined by revenge anymore. I had changed. And now I needed to choose who I was going to be. "Stephen," I began, my voice steady but filled with emotion, "I appreciate everything you've done for me. You've given me a life I never thought possible. But I can't stay here out of obligation. I need to do this for myself. I need to prove that I can build my own future." He looked at me, his face creased with concern. "Are you sure about this? You don't have to leave." "I'm not leaving you," I said, my voice softer now. "But I have to strike out on my own. I need to build my own legacy, not just live in yours. I need to be free." It was hard to say, harder than I had imagined. But it felt right. This was the moment when I was finally letting go of the past, of everything that had held me captive. I turned away from Stephen, stepping into the hallway and grabbing my coat from the chair. "I'm starting a new project," I said, my voice firm. "One that helps other women who have been where I was. Betrayed, lost, unsure of where to turn. I want to give them the opportunity to rebuild, to find their own way." Stephen's voice followed me down the hall, but I didn't stop. "I'll always support you, Evelyn," he said quietly. I nodded, not looking back. "Thank you," I whispered. "But I have to do this on my own." As I stepped into the night, I knew the future was full of unknowns. But I also knew that for the first time in my life I was finally free. Forgiveness isn't about them. It's about freeing yourself, I thought, the words echoing in my mind. I was free. And nothing, no one, was going to hold me back anymore. Morning sunlight broke through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the room. I stood at the window watching as the city slowly came to life below. The streets were filled with movement, the cars weaving through the morning rush, the hustle of a new day beginning. But as I stood there, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace, real peace. I thought about the day I had been abandoned at that train station, standing there in the cold with nothing but the remnants of my broken marriage. I had been desperate, alone, and unsure of where to go next. But in that moment, I had made a choice. I chose to walk forward, even when it seemed impossible. And it was that choice, that determination, that had led me here. Here, to a life I had built from the ashes of everything I had lost. I opened the charity I had always dreamed of. One that would support women who had been betrayed, abandoned, or forgotten. Women like me. The first event we hosted was a triumph. The women who attended shared their stories, their struggles, and their victories. I realized then that I wasn't alone. We were all part of a greater sisterhood, bound by our strength and our willingness to rise above our circumstances. Julian was nowhere to be found. He had faded into the background, a shadow of a man whose grip on my life had once been all-encompassing. Now his name barely crossed my mind. He had no place in my future, and I was finally free of him. The space he had once occupied in my heart had been filled with something new, something more powerful, the freedom to choose. My children, too, had come back into my life. It had taken time, but the walls we had built between us had come down. We rebuilt our relationship, not out of obligation, but out of mutual respect. I wasn't the same mother I had been. I was stronger, more self-assured. And they saw that. Stephen continued to be a part of my life, but the dynamic between us had shifted. He no longer saw me as a daughter to protect, but as a partner in my own right. His health, though still fragile, seemed to stabilize, and his respect for me deepened. We both understood now that while our relationship was important, my independence was essential to who I had become. We could work together, but I would no longer live in anyone's shadow. I celebrated small victories, personal victories. I hosted a gala for women who had overcome hardship, and in their faces, I saw reflections of my own journey. They had fought battles, just as I had, and they were still standing. The event was a success, not just in terms of money raised, but in the way it brought people together. It was a celebration of resilience, of strength, of finding peace after pain. My business ventures were thriving, and for the first time in my life, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The foundation I had laid for myself wasn't built on the ruins of others. It was built on my own terms, from the lessons I had learned and the mistakes I had made. I was in control of my own future. Stephen and I continued to work together, but it was on my terms now. I helped him, but only in ways that didn't compromise my independence. I had found my place in the world, not as someone's daughter or partner, but as myself, Evelyn. As I stood there, looking out at the city, I knew the past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I was free to choose my future, and as the sun rose higher, the world before me felt full of possibility. This is my new dawn, I thought, smiling to myself. The past had no hold on me anymore, and with each step forward, I was creating something far greater than revenge. I was creating peace.